The man drove up to his shop in Springfield, Vermont. Just as he parked in front, he heard faint cries coming from under the hood of his old Silverado. At first, Harold figured it was Mrs. Henderson's troublemaking tabby again. But when he lifted the hood, he froze at the sight before him. A pair of bobcat kittens, tiny, trembling, and impossibly far from the wild home they belonged to. Somehow, those fragile creatures had clung to the engine bay the entire trip. What had they been doing wedged in there? And by what miracle had they survived without falling onto the road or being burned by the heat of the motor? Somewhere out in the Vermont woods, a mother bobcat was frantically searching for her missing young, her hope of reunion fading with every passing minute. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you won't miss any of our unexpected stories. Harold Bennett had long grown accustomed to the drive from his small farm on the outskirts of Brattleboro to his hardware store in Springfield, Vermont, a routine he'd kept for more than 20 years. At 67, with hands cracked from decades of swinging hammers and saws, and a back that reminded him each morning of the years gone by, Harold believed he had seen everything the quiet roads of New England could possibly offer. There were the white-tailed deer that darted out from the maples while fog still blanketed the valley, or the wild turkeys that boldly blocked the road, daring every pickup to stop. The highlight had come one autumn morning last year when a massive black bear strolled through a supermarket parking lot, sending a crowd of shoppers scrambling back inside. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared Harold for what lay beneath the hood of his weathered Chevrolet Silverado on a frigid October morning. The first sign came as he steered into his usual spot behind Bennett's tools and hardware. The engine had barely died when Harold heard it, a sound that made him freeze, his hand still gripping the door handle. It wasn't the cry of a house cat, nor did it sound like any pet he'd ever known. It was higher, sharper, a wild note, as if nature itself were trying to mimic a domesticated animal, but doing so in a way that sent a chill down the spine. The sound came again, this time urgent and insistent, drawing Harold's thick brows together in confusion. "What in the world?" he muttered, his aching knees protesting as he stepped out of the cab of the old Silverado. There was no doubt now the sound was coming from under the hood. Could it be Mrs. Henderson's striped old tomcat sneaking in there again? That fearless cat, Harold swore, didn't know the meaning of danger. He pulled the latch and slowly lifted the hood, bracing himself for the sight of a trembling house cat wedged beside the still warm engine block. But instead, two wide golden eyes glowed back at him from the shadows of the engine bay, locked tight on his own. In that moment, man and creature both froze, staring at each other in stunned silence. And this was clearly no house cat. The upright ears tipped with sharp black tufts, the tawny spotted coat blending into the shadows, and in those amber eyes burned a raw, untamed fire. Harold had lived in Vermont long enough to know exactly what he was looking at. "Lord above!" he gasped, stumbling back a step, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. A bobcat kitten. Two tiny bobcats had actually crawled into the engine bay of his Silverado. Harold's mind instantly replayed the morning's drive. 8 miles of winding mountain road, a blind gravel curve, then the tense merge onto Interstate 91. And yet those two tiny creatures had clung on for the entire ride from Brattleboro to Springfield, like unwilling travelers cloaked in spots and fur. His hands shook, not the usual tremor of age this time, as Harold pulled out his old phone. His clumsy fingers fumbled across the touchscreen. "Damn it! Why do they have to make these things so complicated?" he muttered, before finally managing to punch in 911. 911. "What's your emergency?" "Well, I'm not exactly sure you'd call this an emergency, ma'am, but I've got a situation beyond my pay grade. There are 2 bobcat kittens holed up under the hood of my truck, and I'm pretty certain that's not where they belong." Silence lingered for a beat on the other end. "I'm sorry, sir. Did you just say bobcat kittens?" That's right, ma'am. And before you ask, no, I haven't had a drop to drink. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm stone sober. My head's just spinning, that's all. Within minutes, the quiet parking lot behind Bennett's Tools erupted into a scene straight out of a three-ring circus. First came the Springfield police cruiser, lights flashing red and blue. Next was the Vermont Fish and Wildlife SUV, sliding into the lot with such urgency that a few regular customers abandoned their calculations at the counter and pressed their faces to the glass to watch. Then came the Animal Control Unit's specialty truck, followed by a modified pickup with bold lettering down the sides, Vermont Wildlife Rescue Alliance. Out of that last vehicle stepped Caleb Johnson. And Harold knew at once if anyone had the grit to handle this bizarre situation, it was that man. Caleb moved with the easy confidence of someone who had seen it all, or at least thought he had. At 34, with dark brown hair streaked with sunlit gold and always tousled as if he'd just pulled off a ball cap, and with fine lines etched at the corners of his eyes hinting at a man quick to laugh at life's curveballs, Caleb had spent nearly a decade devoted to rescuing wild animals. He'd pulled raccoons out of chimneys, hauled opossums down from attics, and once memorably freed a bald eagle tangled in chain link at a high school ball field. But when Caleb stepped up to Harold's Silverado and caught sight of those golden eyes peering out from the mechanical forest of belts and hoses, even he let out a short, nervous chuckle. "Mr. Bennett," Caleb said, extending his hand. "I'm Caleb Johnson with the Vermont Wildlife Rescue Center. I've got to admit, in all my years on this job, this is the first time I've seen anything like it. These little ones sure picked one hell of an adventure." Harold gripped his hand firmly, feeling the solid shake and the scatter of scratches and small scars etched across Caleb's strong forearm. There was no mistaking it. Those were battle wounds from rescues past. "Just call me Harold. And I've got to say, I've never been this shaken in my life. How in the world did they even get up there?" Caleb circled the Silverado, his seasoned eyes scanning every detail. At his side was Maya, his young assistant, not yet 25, carrying an assortment of tools that looked half like fishing gear and half like relics from some medieval torture kit. "Here's the thing, Harold," Caleb said, dropping to one knee to peer under the truck. "A mother bobcat will usually stash her kittens someplace she thinks is safe before heading out to hunt. To her, the engine bay of your truck, still warm from yesterday, probably looked like a snug little den. Problem is, you drove off before she had the chance to come back for them." The crowd of onlookers kept growing. Harold's employees had long since stopped pretending to get the store ready to open on time, and a few regulars had joined the half-circle around the Silverado. Old Walter Higgins, who'd been shopping there since Harold's father ran the place, had even dragged a folding chair out from the garden section and planted himself comfortably, as if he were watching the county fair. "This beats cable any day," Walter declared to no one in particular, drawing chuckles from the people nearby. Caleb straightened up, brushing dust from his knee. "All right, here's the plan. We need to get these little ones out without hurting them." He held up both hands now wrapped in thick leather gloves. "And without letting them hurt us. Bobcat kittens might look cute, but their claws were razor sharp. And in a panic, their temper was about as pleasant as a skunk on a triple espresso." "How hard can it be?" Maya asked, her young voice brimming with optimism. "They're just kittens, right?" The look Caleb shot her made it clear he'd heard famous last words like that more times than he could count. "Maya, let me tell you something about wildlife rescue. The moment you think something's going to be easy, that's when the universe decides it's time for a lesson in humility." As if on cue, one of the two Bobcat kittens let out a bizarre sound, half hiss, half growl, and half the shrill scream of some alien creature. A few onlookers instinctively stumbled back, jaws dropping. "See what I mean?" Caleb said, pulling out a contraption that looked like a high-tech fishing net with a telescoping handle. "All right, Harold. I need you to keep that hood wide open. Maya, Get the transport crate ready. What followed was probably the most chaotic 90 minutes in the history of Springfield's Main Street. Caleb's original plan had sounded simple, even tidy. The idea was straightforward. Slip the net in, gently scoop each one out, drop them in the crate. Done. But apparently the Bobcat Kittens had been briefed on a different plan. The moment Caleb's net slid close, both vanished deeper into the engine bay like tiny, fur-covered magicians. Suddenly, the underside of the truck turned into a riotous playground, a three-dimensional maze of hiding spots and escape routes that would have made Houdini nod in approval. Caleb lay flat on his back beneath the Silverado, fumbling with the net while Maya stood above, shouting directions that sounded like the world's most broken GPS system. Left. No, the other left. It's headed toward oh God, now it's wedged by the transmission. At one point, Caleb thought he had scooped one up, but the little creature spun 3 times with a half twist, launched itself squarely onto his chest, then bolted straight back into the mechanical jungle. Caleb collapsed onto the asphalt, staring up at the sky. His face caught somewhere between bewilderment and awe. Did that kitten just parkour off my chest? He asked. No one in particular. Sure, looked like it. Old Walter Higgins chimed in cheerfully, now armed with a bag of buttered popcorn from who knows where, munching away like he was at a drive-in movie. Caleb quickly noticed the second Bobcat kitten was moving with a slight limp, favoring its left hind leg. That should have made it easier to catch. In reality, it turned the little creature into a master of misdirection, always darting left when everyone expected right, using its injury to lure them into underestimating it before bolting at the very last second. Wildlife Officer Patricia Morales, a stern woman in her 40s who had seen her fair share of trouble with wild animals, joined in, closing in from the opposite side of the truck. The result was chaos straight out of a real-life round of whack-a-mole, the kittens popping out of every gap in the engine bay, only to vanish the instant someone got close. Feels like we're trying to catch smoke, Maya panted, her once clean rescue uniform now smeared with oil and grime. Smoke with claws, Caleb corrected, holding out his arm where fresh scratches had torn straight through the thick leather gloves. Harold watched the whole scene with a mix of amusement and guilt. I feel terrible, he told Officer Morales. If I'd known they were under there, Don't blame yourself, Morales replied, her stern face softening. There's no way you could have known. Then she allowed herself a rare smile, cracking through the shell of professionalism. Besides, this is more entertaining than anything this town's seen since the 4th of July parade. You know, the year the mayor's wig blew off. After 45 minutes that could generously be called coordinated tactics, or more honestly, collective chaos, Caleb finally called for a temporary retreat. He stood up, hair sticking out in wild directions, his face streaked with grease, looking for all the world like he'd just stumbled out of a barroom brawl. All right, new plan, Caleb said, still catching his breath. We've got to think like a bobcat. Think like a bobcat? What's that supposed to mean? Maya asked, running a hand through her tangled hair to no effect. A spark of determination lit in Caleb's eyes. It means we stop chasing and start baiting. Harold, you got any canned sardines in that store of yours? Harold's eyes lit up. Sure do. Got a whole shelf of them. Emergency supplies section. Perfect. Now I need everybody to step back. Way back. These little guys are wound tight, and all the noise is only making things worse. The crowd reluctantly began to scatter, though it took some convincing to get old Walter Higgins to surrender his front row seat. Caleb deftly popped open 2 cans of sardines, the pungent, briny smell instantly spreading across the parking lot. He set them right at the edge of the engine bay, a lure too tempting to resist. Then he and Maya stepped back to a safe distance, hands gripping the transport crate, ready for the decisive moment. Now we wait, Caleb said, crouching down with the calm posture of someone who'd been through this scene more than a few times before. And waiting, as always, was the hardest part. Harold found himself holding his breath, and half the crowd was doing the same. Even the morning traffic along Main Street seemed to slow, as if the whole town were silently willing the Bobcat Kittens to come out for the bait. Then, after what felt like hours, but was really only about 10 minutes, a small spotted head emerged from the shadows. The first kitten, nose twitching at the smell of sardines, crept cautiously forward. Hunger finally overpowered fear, and the kitten began to eat with the single-minded focus only the very young possess. Caleb moved with the practiced grace of someone who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. In one smooth motion, he dropped the soft net down, then carefully shifted the little bobcat into the crate before it even realized what had happened. One down. The second, the limping one, proved far more cautious. It had watched its sibling get taken, and now stood frozen. Golden eyes locked on every movement, as if weighing a life or death decision. Caleb placed a fresh bit of sardine right near the crate, where the first kitten was now letting out soft, pitiful cries. That sound finally proved too much for the limping kitten to resist. It crept out of the shadows, hind legs still heavy. And at that moment, Maya, learning on the job in real time, seized her chance. With a burst of chaos and a near escape that made the entire crowd hold its breath, she managed to get it safely into the crate as well. When both Bobcat kittens lay secured inside the metal carrier, a wave of spontaneous applause rippled across the parking lot. Caleb straightened, exhausted but victorious, his clothes streaked with grease and dust as living proof of the morning's battle. Maya grinned ear to ear, looking every bit as if she'd just been dragged through a tornado. "I've handled owls, hawks, even bear cubs," Caleb said, panting and chuckling dryly. "But I never thought I'd come this close to being taken down by two little puffballs, each weighing maybe 3 pounds. Harold stepped closer, his deeply lined face creased with worry. "What happens to them now? I'm sure their mother must be worried sick." Caleb's expression immediately turned serious. "That's the real challenge," Caleb said. "We'll take them back to Brattleboro, right where you started your drive this morning. Officer Morales and her team will set up trail cameras, and we'll place the crate somewhere their mother can easily find them. If we're lucky, she's out there frantically searching and will come back for them." The convoy back to Brattleboro looked far different than the rush that had descended on Harold's hardware store. Leading the way was Caleb's rescue truck. Right behind it, the steel crate carrying the 2 Bobcat kittens safe but letting out the occasional weak mew that sounded lost against the rumble of engines. Harold followed in his now celebrity Silverado, the unlikely star of the whole town, while Officer Morales' vehicle brought up the rear. Word had spread quickly, and a number of Brattleboro residents gathered at the release site, a patch of open woods not far from Harold's farm. It was the perfect spot, a small clearing ringed by forest, far enough from homes to be safe, yet close enough to the strange journey the kittens had begun. Caleb and Maya carefully set the crates down, doors propped open, though the kittens were still too frightened to step out. Cameras were mounted at strategic points, infrared sensors primed to capture any movement in the night. "Now comes the hardest part," Caleb explained quietly. "We have to leave them here and trust their instincts. Bobcats have an incredible sense of smell, and if their mother is anywhere nearby, she's already tracking their scent." The waiting was pure torture. The rescue team pulled back to a safe distance, monitoring the feed from the forest cameras on Caleb's truck, a wireless setup Maya had just rigged. Harold, meanwhile, kept his store closed all day for the first time in 15 years and refused to leave, sitting stubbornly in his Silverado despite Caleb's repeated assurances that this could take hours, maybe even all night. "Those little ones rode under my hood the whole way here," Harold said simply when Caleb urged him to go home and rest. "The least I can do is stay and see if they make it back to their mother." Evening settled in. The Vermont sun, weak but stubborn in the October sky, sank slowly behind the fiery line of maples. The curious crowd had mostly dispersed, leaving only a handful of patient holdouts. Among them, of course, was old Walter Higgins, who had somehow managed to drag along his trusty folding chair for the next chapter of the adventure. Close to 5 o'clock, as the forest's shadow stretched fully across the clearing, Maya suddenly gripped Caleb's arm. "Movement," she whispered, pointing to the laptop screen streaming the feed from the infrared camera. Everyone held their breath as a figure slipped quietly out of the underbrush. Though the image was grainy, there was no mistaking the fluid grace of an adult bobcat. It moved like liquid shadow, its dappled coat melting perfectly into the forest bathed in sunset light. But it was the behavior that made Caleb's throat tighten with emotion. It was clearly tracking scent, head low, steps weaving in that telltale zigzag of a mother searching for her young, and the instant it caught sight of the crates, its entire body changed. It froze, muscles rippling and taut, tufted ears snapping upright, swiveling like living radar. And then they heard an unmistakable sound piping through the small speaker in Caleb's truck, pulling every one of them forward in their seats at once. The two Bobcat Kittens began to cry out, their high-pitched calls echoing across the empty woods. What happened next was so quick that, if not for the cameras, Caleb might have thought he'd dreamed it. The mother Bobcat sprang forward, covering the distance in 3 clean, stunning leaps that brought her straight to the crates. Her young burst out, the limp forgotten in their desperate rush to touch her. The reunion was brief but fierce, a tangle of spotted fur, the mother pressing her nose against each one, then swiping quick licks across their faces. And just as suddenly as she'd appeared, she turned and led them back into the forest. The last image captured on camera showed 3 bobcat shapes fading into the Vermont wilds. The mother in the lead, the healthy kitten close on her heels, and the limping one straining to keep pace its injury. It seemed not as dire as Caleb had feared. The rescue truck erupted in cheers. Maya even burst into tears, then quickly covered with a joke about it being nothing more than an allergy to brushwood. Caleb wasn't much better off, blinking rapidly and clearing his throat, more than once to mask his emotions. Even Officer Morales, who had worn a stern expression through the entire ordeal, now broke into a rare, radiant smile. Harold sat quietly in his Silverado, long after the Bobcat family disappeared into the trees, his hands still resting on the wheel. When he finally spoke, his voice caught with emotion. 40 miles of highway, all those stops and starts, and they still held on. The toughest little creatures I've ever seen. Caleb stepped up, tapping lightly on the window. "You know, Harold, you didn't just take them on an accidental adventure. You may have saved their lives. If they'd been separated from their mother any longer, especially that injured one, they might not have made it." Harold nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "Either way, I'd say this has got to be the strangest day of my life." "Tell you what," Caleb said with a grin, "I'll send you the footage. You'll see, you're about to be famous." The man who gave bobcats a ride to Springfield. And Caleb was right. The video of that miraculous reunion, posted by the Vermont Wildlife Rescue Alliance, went viral within days. Harold suddenly found himself a local celebrity. Customers from all over Windham County stopped by just to see the now famous Silverado and hear him retell the story. He even made a small sign and fixed it right to the hood. "Honorary Uber service for Bobcats, October 2024. As for Caleb and Maya, they went back to their daily rescue work, but the Bobcat case quickly became legend in their circles. At wildlife rescue conferences, Caleb often retold the story of the 2 kittens who turned what should have been a routine call into an adventure of almost epic proportions, complete with slides of himself bedraggled, clothes smeared with grease, after a pitched battle with 2 tiny puffballs. But perhaps the most moving ending came 3 weeks later. Opening his store at dawn, Harold spotted them. Three glowing eye-shine reflections caught in the headlights, right at the edge of the lot. The mother, Bobcat, and her two kittens, one of them, the former limper, now walking perfectly sound, watched him quietly from the tree line. They lingered only a moment, just long enough for Harold to be certain it was truly them before slipping back into the forest. He stood in the chill of the early morning breeze, a deep smile etched across his weathered face. "Don't mention it," he said softly to the empty lot. "Next time you need a ride, just give me a heads up. But do me a favor, let me bring a crate from the start." From that day on, Harold made it a habit to check under the hood each morning. Not because he expected to see bobcats again. Lightning rarely strikes twice in the same place, but because that extraordinary morning had taught him something. The world always holds hidden wonders, even along the most familiar roads. And sometimes, those wonders come spotted, golden-eyed, hitching a ride to an adventure no one could have imagined. In the months that followed, the Bobcat family was occasionally spotted by locals around Brattleboro. They always kept a respectful distance from the neighborhoods, but it was clear they were thriving in their wild home. State biologists later noted that the incident had provided valuable data on bobcat behavior and adaptability. But for Harold, Caleb, and everyone who had witnessed that October morning's drama, it was simply a reminder that the forests of Vermont still pulsed with the fierce heartbeat of the wild, and that human lives and the animal world sometimes intersect in ways no one could ever predict. As Caleb often said when retelling the story at rescue conferences, wildlife rescue isn't just about saving them. Sometimes, it's about discovering that we share this world with creatures far tougher, cleverer, and more extraordinary than we ever imagined. And once in a while, we get the chance to become part of their story in ways we never saw coming. The video of the reunion continued to spread, touching hearts across the globe. But for those who had actually been there, Harold with grease still on his hands, Caleb with claw marks striping his arm and his hair a tangled mess, Maya with tear-streaked cheeks, and old Walter Higgins with his folding chair and bag of popcorn, it was more than just a viral moment. It was a reminder that even in a modern world paved over with asphalt and concrete, miracles still happen. Sometimes, though, those miracles just need a ride to make it back where they belong.